The blood-curdling scream pierced the night, echoing through the small homestead nestled in the shadows of the Montana wilderness. Penelope Turner bolted upright in her bed, her nightgown soaked with sweat, her golden hair plastered to her face as she gasped for air. The nightmare had returned, more vivid than ever before. It was the spring of 1876, and Montana City was still a place where fortunes could be made and lost in a heartbeat. The gold rush had brought prosperity to some parts of the Montana Territory, but the small settlement where Penelope had established her modest homestead remained largely untouched by such wealth. Penelope slipped out of bed, her bare feet padding across the wooden floor as she moved to the window. The full moon cast an eerie glow across the landscape, illuminating the rolling hills and distant mountains. She had come west 3 months ago, following the death of her parents in a devastating fire that had consumed their family home in Boston. With nothing left to keep her in the east, she had used what little inheritance remained to purchase this small plot of land. But the nightmares had followed her. Night after night, she relived the horror of the fire, the screams of her parents trapped inside, the smell of burning wood and flesh. Sometimes the dreams changed, becoming even more terrifying, faceless men chasing her through endless dark corridors, or being buried alive beneath the charred remains of her childhood home. A soft knock at her door startled her. "Miss Turner, are you all right?" The voice was deep, concerned. Penelope wrapped a shawl around her shoulders before opening the door to find her neighbor, Adam Evans, standing there, hat in hand. Even in the dim light of the oil lamp he carried, his concern was evident in his blue eyes. "I heard you scream," he said. "I was checking the fence line when I heard it." Adam Evans had been a godsend since her arrival. His ranch bordered her small homestead, and he had helped her settle in, teaching her the basics of farming and offering assistance whenever needed. At 32, he was a respected figure in Montana City, known for his fairness, skill with horses, and the quiet authority he carried. "Just a bad dream, Mr. Evans," she replied, trying to steady her voice. "I'm sorry to have disturbed you." He studied her face, taking in the pallor of her skin and the slight tremble in her hands. "You've been having them a lot, haven't you?" Penelope looked away. "They'll pass. They always do." "Miss Turner," he hesitated. "Penelope, you can't keep going like this. You barely sleep, and when you do, these nightmares plague you." "What would you have me do?" she asked, a hint of frustration in her voice. "They're just dreams. Dreams that make you scream as though someone's murdering you," he pointed out gently. "The folks in town are starting to talk." Of course they were. Montana City might have been growing, but it was still small enough that everyone knew everyone else's business. She could imagine what they were saying about the strange woman from the east who lived alone and screamed in the night. "Let them talk," she said, lifting her chin defiantly. "I've given them no cause for complaint otherwise." Adam sighed, running a hand through his sandy brown hair. "I'm worried about you, that's all. You're exhausting yourself." The genuine concern in his voice touched her. Since arriving in Montana, she had kept most people at a distance, unwilling to form attachments after losing everything she held dear. But Adam had slowly chipped away at her defenses with his quiet kindness and unwavering support. "I appreciate your concern, but I'll be fine," she insisted, though the dark circles under her eyes told a different story. Adam looked like he wanted to argue further but thought better of it. "At least let me bring you some of Mrs. Hoffman's herbal tea tomorrow. She swears it helps with sleep." Penelope nodded, grateful for the offer. "Thank you." After Adam left, she returned to bed but didn't sleep. Instead, she watched the moonlight move across the floor as the hours passed, afraid to close her eyes and face her demons once more. The next morning dawned bright and clear. Penelope went about her chores mechanically, gathering eggs from her small chicken coop and tending to her vegetable garden. The physical labor helped distract her from her exhaustion, but by midday, she found herself nodding off as she sat on the porch mending a torn shirt. The sound of approaching hoofbeats roused her. Adam rode up on his chestnut gelding, dismounting with the easy grace of a man who had spent most of his life in the saddle. "Good afternoon," he called, leading his horse to the hitching post. "I brought that tea I promised." Penelope set aside her mending and stood to greet him. "You didn't need to ride all this way just for that." "I was headed to town anyway," he replied with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. In his hand was a small burlap sack. "Mrs. Hoffman says to steep it for at least 10 minutes and to drink it just before bedtime." "Please thank her for me," Penelope said, accepting the gift. "Would you care for some coffee before you continue to town?" Adam hesitated, then nodded. "That would be nice, thank you." Inside her small cabin, Penelope busied herself with the coffee pot while Adam removed his hat and took a seat at her modest table. She was acutely aware of his presence, the way he seemed too large for the small space, his broad shoulders and long legs making her furniture appear doll-sized in comparison. "The garden's looking good," he commented. "Those potatoes should do well come harvest time." "I hope so. I'm still learning what grows best here." She placed a steaming cup of coffee before him. "The soil's different from what I was used to back east. You've taken to it well. Most city folks who come out here don't last a season." "I'm not most city folks," she replied with a hint of pride. Adam smiled, a genuine one this time that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "No, you certainly are not." They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, sipping their coffee. Penelope found herself studying him when he wasn't looking, the sun-weathered skin, the small scar above his right eyebrow, the strong hands that held the delicate china cup with surprising gentleness. "Sheriff Matthews stopped by my place this morning," Adam said eventually, setting down his cup. "There've been reports of a gang operating in the area. The Blackwell outfit." Penelope frowned. "I've heard that name before. James Blackwell and his brothers. They've been causing trouble up and down the territory for a couple of years now. Cattle rustling, mostly, but they've been known to rob stage coaches and homesteads too." A chill ran down Penelope's spine. "And they're near Montana City now," Adam nodded. "The sheriff thinks they might be hiding out in the foothills to the west. I just wanted to warn you to be extra cautious. Keep your doors locked at night, and maybe it's time I taught you how to handle a rifle properly." "I know how to shoot," she said defensively. He raised an eyebrow. "With all due respect, Miss Turner, hitting a fence post at 10 paces isn't the same as defending yourself against someone who means you harm." She couldn't argue with that. Her father had allowed her to learn the basics of shooting when she was younger, considered quite scandalous in their Boston social circle, but she was far from proficient. "Very well," she conceded. "When would you suggest we begin these lessons?" "Tomorrow morning, if you're agreeable. I need to check on my herd today after I pick up supplies in town." After Adam departed, Penelope found herself dwelling on his warning. The isolation that had initially appealed to her now seemed more threatening. Her nearest neighbor aside from Adam was over 3 miles away, and the main settlement of Montana City was a good hour's ride. That night, she tried Mrs. Hoffman's tea. The bitter herbal concoction was unpleasant, but she dutifully drank every drop before retiring. Whether it was the tea or simple exhaustion, she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep for the first time in weeks. The shooting lessons with Adam began the following day. He brought an old Winchester repeater that had belonged to his father, explaining that its lighter weight and shorter length made it more suitable for someone of her stature. "Keep both eyes open," he instructed. standing behind her as she took aim at an empty can he'd placed on a fence post. "Breathe naturally and squeeze the trigger gently, don't pull it." Penelope tried to focus, but she was distracted by his proximity, the warmth of him at her back, the slight scent of leather and horses that seemed to cling to him. The rifle cracked and the can jumped, though she only grazed its edge. "Not bad," Adam said encouragingly. "Let's try again." By midday, she had managed to hit the target consistently, though not always where she aimed. Her shoulder ached from the rifle's recoil, and her ears rang despite the cotton Adam had suggested she use as rudimentary protection. "You're a quick study," he said as they sat on her porch sharing a simple lunch of bread, cheese, and apples. "With practice, you'll be a fine shot." "I hope I never need to use these skills," she said quietly. Adam's expression grew serious. "As do I, but out here, it's better to have abilities you never use than to need them and not have them." Over the next 2 weeks, a routine developed. Adam would ride over each morning, and they would spend an hour or two practicing with the rifle. Afterward, he would help her with whatever chores needed doing around the homestead, before returning to his own responsibilities. The nightmares, while not gone completely, had diminished in both frequency and intensity. The herbal tea helped, but Penelope suspected it was also Adam's steady presence in her life that was making the difference. Knowing he was just a short ride away brought comfort she hadn't expected. One evening, as they sat on her porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Adam broke their comfortable silence. "The town's holding a social on Saturday evening," he said, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "There's to be music and dancing at the schoolhouse." Penelope glanced at him, surprised. "Is that so?" "I was wondering if you might like to attend," he continued, now looking decidedly uncomfortable. "With me, that is." She blinked, caught off guard by the invitation. "You're asking to escort me to the social?" A flush crept up his neck. "I suppose I am." Penelope hadn't attended any social function since arriving in Montana City, preferring to keep to herself as she adjusted to her new life. The prospect of being the center of attention as the newcomer from the East was daunting, but the hopeful look in Adam's eyes made her hesitate to refuse. I don't know," she said honestly. "I haven't done much socializing lately." "All the more reason to start," he countered gently. "You can't hide away forever, Penelope." She bristled slightly at his presumption. "I'm not hiding." His expression softened. "Maybe that was the wrong word, but you've been through something terrible, and while I don't know all the details, I know it's changed you. Sometimes, stepping back into the world can help heal those wounds." There was wisdom in his words and something else, a personal understanding that made her wonder what wounds he carried himself. "All right," she agreed finally. "I'll go with you to the social." The smile that lit up his face was worth any discomfort she might feel at the event. "I'll pick you up at 6 on Saturday then." When Saturday arrived, Penelope spent an unprecedented amount of time on her appearance. She washed her hair with her precious lavender-scented soap, saved for special occasions, and let it dry in loose waves down her back. From her trunk, she retrieved a dress she hadn't worn since Boston, a simple but elegant gown of pale blue silk that her mother had insisted she bring west for proper occasions. The memory of her mother brought a familiar pang of grief, but it was duller now, tempered by time and the new life she was building. At precisely 6 o'clock, the sound of a wagon approaching drew her to the window. Adam had foregone his usual riding clothes for a clean black suit, white shirt, and string tie. He had even trimmed his beard and slicked back his hair. The transformation was striking, highlighting his handsome features in a way his everyday attire did not. "You look beautiful," he said when she opened the door, his voice tinged with awe. Penelope felt a blush warm her cheeks. "Thank you. You clean up rather well yourself, Mr. Evans." The drive to town was pleasant, with Adam pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the area's history. By the time they reached the schoolhouse, Penelope's nervousness had largely dissipated, replaced by a tentative excitement. The schoolhouse had been transformed for the occasion, with paper lanterns hanging from the ceiling and the desks pushed to the sides to create a dance floor. A small group of musicians occupied one corner, playing lively tunes on fiddles, a banjo, and a harmonica. The room was already crowded with what seemed to be the entire population of Montana City and the surrounding area. Their entrance did not go unnoticed. Conversations paused momentarily as curious eyes turned their way, and Penelope fought the urge to flee under the scrutiny. Adam's hand came to rest lightly at the small of her back, a reassuring presence. "Don't mind them," he murmured. "They're just not used to seeing me with a beautiful woman on my arm." His comment surprised a laugh out of her, easing her tension. "I find that hard to believe, Mr. Evans." Before he could respond, they were approached by an older couple, the woman plump and rosy-cheeked, the man tall and distinguished despite his weather-beaten appearance. "Adam, my boy," the man exclaimed, clapping him on the shoulder. "Good to see you here, and this must be Miss Turner." "Judge and Mrs. Hollister," Adam said. "May I present Miss Penelope Turner? Penelope, Judge Hollister is our circuit judge and one of the town's founding fathers." Penelope offered her hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you both." Mrs. Hollister beamed at her. "We've heard so much about you, dear. It's wonderful to finally make your acquaintance. Adam speaks very highly of you." Penelope glanced at Adam, who suddenly seemed fascinated by the decorations overhead. "Does he now?" "Oh, yes," Mrs. Hollister continued, oblivious to Adam's discomfort. "He's quite impressed with how you've managed on your own. Not many women would have the fortitude." The judge cleared his throat. "What my wife means to say is that we're glad to have you in our community, Miss Turner. New blood keeps a town vibrant." The conversation continued pleasantly for a few minutes, before the Hollisters excused themselves to greet other arrivals. Throughout the evening, Adam introduced Penelope to what seemed like every resident of Montana City: the shopkeepers, the schoolteacher, the doctor, and countless ranchers and their families. To her surprise, everyone was welcoming, expressing genuine interest in her well-being and offering assistance should she ever need it. "See," Adam said as they finally found themselves alone by the refreshment table. "Not so terrible after all." Penelope smiled, feeling more at ease than she had in months. "I suppose not. Your community is quite hospitable." "Our community," he corrected gently. "You're part of it now." The musicians struck up a waltz and Adam's expression grew hopeful. "Would you do me the honor?" he asked, extending his hand. Penelope hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his. "I should warn you, it's been some time since I danced. I'm not exactly a regular at fancy Boston balls myself," he replied with a grin. "We can stumble through it together." And stumble they did at first. Adam was solid and strong but not particularly graceful, and Penelope found herself counting steps under her breath to remember the pattern. But soon they found their rhythm, moving together more smoothly as they circled the floor. "You're full of surprises, Miss Turner," Adam said as he guided her through a turn. "I wouldn't have guessed you knew how to waltz." "My mother insisted on proper instruction in all the social graces," she explained, "though I doubt she envisioned me using those skills in a Montana schoolhouse." Something flickered in his eyes at the mention of her mother's sympathy, perhaps, or curiosity about the family she rarely discussed. But he didn't press for details, for which she was grateful. As the evening wore on, Penelope found herself genuinely enjoying the festivities. She danced not only with Adam, but with several other men from the community, including Judge Hollister and the young blacksmith, whose name she couldn't quite recall. She joined a group of women who invited her to share in their conversation about the upcoming harvest festival, and she even found herself laughing at the sheriff's outrageous stories about his days as a Pony Express rider. It was nearly midnight when Adam suggested they head home. The night air had grown chilly, and he wrapped a blanket around her shoulders as they settled into the wagon for the return journey. "Thank you for persuading me to come tonight," Penelope said as they drove away from the lights and music of the schoolhouse. "I had forgotten what it's like to simply enjoy myself." Adam glanced at her, his expression soft in the moonlight. "You have a beautiful smile, Penelope. It's good to see it." The compliment warmed her more than the blanket. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of the wagon wheels and the steady clop of the horses' hooves. "You miss it?" Adam asked eventually. "Boston, I mean." Penelope considered the question. "I miss certain aspects. The libraries, the theaters, the convenience of having shops just around the corner." She paused. "But mostly, I miss who I was there before the fire, before I lost everything." It was the first time she had spoken so directly about the tragedy that had brought her west, and once she started, the words seemed to flow of their own accord. "It happened so quickly," she continued, her voice soft but steady. "I was at a friend's house for dinner. By the time I returned home, the fire had already consumed most of the house. The neighbors said they heard my parents screaming, but no one could get to them in time." Adam's hand found hers in the darkness, his touch warm and reassuring. "I'm so sorry, Penelope. The authorities said it was likely a candle left burning, but I've always wondered." She trailed off, unwilling to voice the suspicion that had haunted her. "Anyway, afterward, there was nothing left for me there. My father's investments had failed, and what little money remained barely covered their debts. Coming west seemed like my only option." "It took courage," Adam said, "to leave everything behind and start fresh in a place you knew nothing about." Penelope laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. Not courage, desperation perhaps, or simply the lack of alternatives. "Call it what you will, but I've seen plenty of people break under less hardship." His hand tightened around hers. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for." The rest of the journey passed in silence, but Adam continued to hold her hand, his thumb occasionally brushing across her knuckles in a gesture that was both comforting and somehow thrilling. When they reached her homestead, Adam helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. Under the vast canopy of stars, with the scent of pine in the air and the distant howl of a coyote, Penelope felt a shift between them, a tension that hadn't been there before, or perhaps one she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge. "Thank you for a lovely evening," she said, suddenly shy. Adam nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "May I call on you tomorrow? Perhaps we could take a ride to the lake. It's beautiful this time of year." "I would like that," she replied. He hesitated, then leaned forward and brushed his lips against her cheek, a touch so gentle it might have been the whisper of the night breeze. "Good night, Penelope. Sleep well." That night, for the first time since the fire, Penelope slept deeply and dreamlessly without the aid of Mrs. Hoffman's tea. The weeks that followed were among the happiest of Penelope's life. She and Adam spent more and more time together, riding through the hills, fishing in the clear streams, or simply sitting on her porch talking as the sun set. He told her about growing up in Montana Territory, about losing his father to pneumonia when he was 17 and taking over the ranch, about his dreams of expanding his herd and building a house to replace the modest cabin he currently occupied. In return, she shared stories of her childhood in Boston, of her father's work as a merchant and her mother's involvement with various charitable societies, of the books she loved and the places she had hoped to visit someday. She found herself able to speak of her parents without the crushing grief that had once accompanied their memory, and she knew Adam's patient understanding was largely responsible for that healing. The nightmares still came occasionally, but they were less frequent and less intense. And on the worst nights when she woke screaming, she no longer faced the darkness alone. Adam had taken to checking on her each evening before returning to his own ranch, and sometimes, if the hour was late or the weather poor, he would sleep on her porch, ready to offer comfort if needed. On one such night, a particularly violent nightmare sent Penelope into a state of hysterical terror. She had dreamed not of the fire this time, but of men breaking into her home, their faces shrouded in shadow as they advanced toward her with glinting knives. Her screams had brought Adam bursting through the door, rifle in hand, his face tight with concern. "Penelope," he called, rushing to her bedside. "Penelope, wake up. It's just a dream." She came to consciousness with a gasp, her eyes wild, her body trembling uncontrollably. "They were here," she choked out. "They were going to kill me." Adam set aside his rifle and sat on the edge of her bed, gathering her into his arms without hesitation. "No one's here," he assured her, his voice low and soothing. "Just me. You're safe. I've got you." Penelope clung to him, her face buried against his chest as violent sobs racked her body. He held her tightly, one hand stroking her hair, the other rubbing circles on her back as he murmured words of comfort. "I'm sorry," she whispered when she could finally speak. "I'm sorry for being so weak." "Hush now," he said firmly. "You're the furthest thing from weak, Penelope Turner." She pulled back slightly to look at him, aware that her face must be a mess of tears and that her hair was tangled from sleep, but unable to summon the energy to care. "Why are you so good to me, Adam?" His expression softened, and he reached up to brush a strand of hair from her face. "Do you really not know?" The tenderness in his eyes took her breath away. I'm not sure." Adam hesitated, seeming to wage some internal battle, then let out a slow breath. "Because I've fallen in love with you, Penelope. I think I started falling the first day I saw you, struggling to unload your wagon all by yourself, too proud to ask for help even though you clearly needed it." Penelope stared at him, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain he must hear it. "You love me," he nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. "I do. And I know it might be too soon, or you might not feel the same way, and that's all right. I just want you to know that I'm here for you because I care about you, not out of pity or obligation." Tears welled in her eyes again, but these were different, warm and cleansing rather than born of fear. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I've been afraid to admit it, even to myself. After losing my parents, the thought of loving someone again, of being vulnerable to that kind of pain." "I understand," he said. "Loss changes a person, makes them wary of attachments." Something in his tone made her wonder. "You speak as if from experience." Adam was quiet for a long moment. "My wife, Sarah, died 6 years ago," he finally said, his voice low. "Childbirth. We lost the baby to a little boy." Penelope's hand went to her mouth. "Oh, Adam, I had no idea you were married before." "I don't talk about it much," he admitted. "It was a long time ago." "Not so long," she countered gently. "Such grief doesn't simply vanish with time." "No," he agreed. "It doesn't, but it changes, becomes something you can carry without being crushed by it." He took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "Meeting you. It's the first time since Sarah that I've felt this way about anyone, and I never expected to feel it again." Penelope's heart swelled with a mixture of tenderness and sorrow for the pain he had endured. "We're quite a pair, aren't we? Both trying to outrun our ghosts." "Maybe we don't need to outrun them," Adam suggested. Maybe we just need to learn to live with them, together. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question as much as an answer. But when Penelope responded, sliding her arms around his neck and pressing closer, Adam deepened the kiss, his hands framing her face with a reverence that made her heart ache. When they finally parted, both breathless, Adam rested his forehead against hers. "I should go," he said reluctantly. "It's not proper for me to be in your bedroom like this." Penelope tightened her hold on him. "Stay," she whispered. "Just hold me. I don't want to be alone tonight." Adam hesitated, clearly torn between desire and propriety. "Penelope, please," she said. "I'm not asking for anything improper. I just need you near me." After a moment's consideration, he nodded. "All right, but I'll stay on top of the covers and I'll be gone before dawn." He removed his boots and stretched out beside her, drawing her against his side. Penelope rested her head on his chest, comforted by the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her ear. For the first time in months, perhaps years, she felt truly safe. "Sleep now," Adam murmured, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I'll keep the nightmares away." And remarkably, he did. Penelope drifted into a peaceful slumber, free from the terrors that usually plagued her dreams. True to his word, Adam was gone when she woke the next morning, though he had left a note on her pillow. "Gone to check the herd. Will return by noon. Rest well." The simple message brought a smile to her face. She rose with more energy than she had felt in ages, humming to herself as she went about her morning chores. The chickens were fed, the cow milked, and the garden tended, all before the sun had fully risen above the eastern hills. By mid-morning, clouds had gathered, promising a summer storm. Penelope had just finished bringing in the laundry from the line when she heard the sound of approaching horses, more than one, and moving at speed. A flicker of unease passed through her. Adam never rode so recklessly, and he had mentioned he would be alone. She hurried inside, retrieving the Winchester from its place beside the door and checking that it was loaded through the window. She watched as 3 riders came into view. They were not from Montana City, of that much she was certain. These men had the hard, hungry look of drifters, their clothes dusty and worn, their faces shadowed by wide-brimmed hats. Penelope's mouth went dry. Could these be members of the Blackwell gang Adam had warned her about? She stepped away from the window, hoping they would simply pass by her homestead, but the sound of the horses slowed, then stopped. A moment later, heavy boots thumped on her porch. "Hello, the house," a voice called. "Anybody home?" Penelope remained silent, the rifle clutched in trembling hands. Perhaps if they thought the place was empty, they would move on. "We know you're in there, madam," the voice continued. "Saw the smoke from your chimney. We don't mean no harm. Just looking for some water for our horses and maybe a bite to eat if you can spare it." She hesitated. It was possible they were exactly what they claimed to be, travelers in need of assistance. Hospitality was the way of the West, and refusing it without cause would be suspicious. Taking a deep breath to steady herself, Penelope moved to the door, keeping the rifle ready but not raised. "I can provide water for your horses," she called through the wooden barrier, "but I have little food to spare." "Much obliged, madam. We won't be no trouble." Steeling herself, Penelope opened the door just enough to see the men. There were 3 of them, as she had counted: a tall, lean man with a scar running down one cheek, a shorter, stockier fellow with a bristling red beard, and a youth who couldn't have been more than 20 with dark hair and shifty eyes. "The well's around back," she said, not inviting them inside. "You can water your horses there." The tall man touched his hat. "Thank you kindly. I'm Jed. These are my brothers Tom and Will." He gestured to the red-bearded man and the youth in turn. Penelope nodded but didn't offer her name. "Please see to your horses quickly. A storm's coming." The men exchanged glances that made her grip tighten on the rifle. "Sure thing, madam," Jed said. "Say, is your husband around? Maybe he'd be willing to trade." "We got some fine tobacco that—" "I have no husband," Penelope interrupted, then immediately regretted revealing that information. "But I'm expecting company shortly." Another glance between the brothers, this one more overt. The youngest, Will, actually smirked. "Well now, ain't that interesting," Tom said, his tone making Penelope's skin crawl. "A pretty lady all alone out here." Penelope raised the rifle slightly. "I'm not alone, and I'm quite capable of defending myself and my property." Jed held up his hands in a placating gesture. "No need for that, madam. We're just passing through, like I said." "Then pass through," she replied firmly. "Water your horses and be on your way." The three men moved toward the back of the house, but not before Penelope caught Jed murmuring something to his brothers that made them chuckle darkly. She closed and barred the door, her heart racing. Through the window, she could see them at the well, but they seemed more interested in surveying her property than in watering their horses. The youngest brother, Will, was peering into her barn while Tom appeared to be counting her chickens. Jed's gaze repeatedly returned to the house, calculating. Penelope moved from window to window, keeping track of their movements while trying to determine her best course of action. If she fired a warning shot, it might scare them off or it might provoke them. If Adam were to arrive now, he would be outnumbered 3-1. The men finally returned to the front of the house. "Much obliged for the water, madam," Jed called. "We'll be on our way now." Penelope didn't respond, watching warily as they mounted their horses. They made a show of riding away, but she noticed they only went as far as the bend in the road before stopping, partially concealed by a stand of pine trees. They were waiting for something or planning something. And Penelope had a sinking feeling she knew what it was. She needed to get to Adam, to warn him. But leaving the relative safety of the house meant exposing herself to the men who were clearly watching. And if they were indeed members of the Blackwell gang, as she increasingly suspected, they wouldn't hesitate to harm her. A rumble of thunder punctuated her thoughts, and the first fat raindrops began to fall from the darkening sky. The storm might provide cover, but it would also slow her progress if she attempted to flee. Penelope made a quick decision. Gathering essential supplies, ammunition, a canteen of water, a loaf of bread, and her father's pocket watch, the only memento she had of him, she stuffed them into a small sack. Then she changed from her dress into the trousers and shirt she sometimes wore for heavy farm work, clothes that would allow her to move more freely if needed. The rain was falling steadily now, and lightning flashed across the sky. Perfect cover for what she planned. Moving quietly to the back door, Penelope peered out cautiously. The men's attention seemed focused on the front of the house and the road from town. If she could slip out unnoticed and make it to the tree line on the eastern edge of her property, she might be able to circle around to Adam's ranch without being spotted. Taking a deep breath, she slipped outside, the Winchester clutched firmly in her hands. The rain quickly soaked her clothing as she crouched low, moving from the cover of the chicken coop to the woodshed, then to a stand of young aspens that provided minimal concealment. She had almost reached the tree line when a shout went up. "There she goes!" Penelope didn't look back. She ran, her boots slipping in the mud as the rain came down in sheets. Behind her, she could hear the thunder of hoofbeats as the men gave chase. The forest was her only hope. On horseback, the men would have the advantage in open terrain, but among the trees, they would be forced to slow down or dismount. She plunged into the dense pines, ignoring the branches that whipped at her face and tore at her clothing. The Winchester was awkward to carry while running, but she refused to abandon it. It might be her only chance if the men caught up to her. The sound of pursuit grew closer. Penelope veered sharply to the right, splashing through a shallow creek and scrambling up a steep embankment on the other side. Her lungs burned and her legs trembled with exertion, but fear drove her onward. A gunshot cracked through the air, the bullet splintering a tree trunk mere inches from her head. Penelope stifled a scream and dove behind a fallen log, her heart pounding so violently she feared it might burst from her chest. "Come on out, lady," Jed's voice carried through the rain. "We just want to talk." Penelope remained silent, trying to control her ragged breathing. She could hear them dismounting, their boots squelching in the sodden earth as they spread out to search for her. "Ain't no use hiding," Tom called. "These woods ain't that big, we'll find you eventually." They were right about that. The forested area on her property wasn't extensive enough to hide in indefinitely, but if she could just evade them long enough for Adam to realize something was wrong. A twig snapped close by, and Penelope tightened her grip on the rifle. Through a gap in the log, she could see Will's boots as he moved cautiously through the underbrush, not 10 feet from her hiding place. She held her breath as he passed, then slowly, silently, began to inch away in the opposite direction. If she could circle back toward the house, perhaps she could make it to the barn and take her horse. The rain was easing now, which was both a blessing and a curse. She could see better, but so could her pursuers. Moving as quietly as possible, Penelope navigated through the trees, pausing frequently to listen for signs of the men. She had nearly reached the edge of the forest when a hand clamped over her mouth from behind, an arm like iron wrapping around her waist. The Winchester was wrenched from her grasp before she could swing it around. "Gotcha," Jed's voice hissed in her ear. "Now, why'd you have to go and run like that, girl? Made things harder than they needed to be." Penelope struggled fiercely, biting down on the hand that covered her mouth. Jed cursed and loosened his grip just enough for her to wrench free and scream at the top of her lungs. "Adam!" A fist connected with her cheekbone, sending her sprawling to the ground. Through watering eyes, she saw Jed standing over her, shaking his stinging hand. "That wasn't very ladylike," he growled. Penelope spat blood from her split lip. "Neither was hitting a woman, you coward." His face darkened with rage, and he reached for her again, but a gunshot stopped him cold. Not close like the earlier one, but distinct enough to be heard over the diminishing rain. "Will, Tom," Jed shouted. "We got company." Penelope's heart soared. "Adam." It had to be Adam. Jed hauled her to her feet, dragging her roughly toward the clearing where they had left their horses. Tom and Will emerged from the trees, their expressions tense. "Someone's coming up the road," Tom confirmed. "2 riders moving fast." "Change of plans," Jed decided. "We take her with us. She'll make good insurance." Penelope renewed her struggles. "Let me go. You won't get away with this." Jed laughed harshly. "We already have, sweetheart. The Blackwell brothers don't leave witnesses." So her suspicions had been correct. These weren't just random drifters, but the notorious gang Adam had warned her about. And now they intended to use her as a hostage to secure their escape. "Mount up," Jed ordered his brothers. "Will, you take the girl on your horse. Tie her hands first." Will produced a length of rope and roughly bound Penelope's wrists, ignoring her continued resistance. Then he hoisted her onto his horse and climbed up behind her, one arm wrapped tightly around her waist to prevent her from throwing herself off. They had just started to move when the sound of a rifle being cocked froze them in place. "Let her go." Adam's voice was deadly calm as he stepped into view, his Winchester aimed steadily at Jed. Beside him was Sheriff Matthews, his revolver drawn. "Well now," Jed drawled, though Penelope could hear the tension beneath his forced casualness. "Looks like we got ourselves a standoff." "There's no standoff," the sheriff replied. There's 3 of you and a whole posse behind us. You're surrounded. Blackwell, Penelope felt, will stiffen against her back. He's bluffing, he hissed to his brothers. I don't see no posse. You will, Adam promised. Any minute now. But if you harm one hair on Miss Turner's head, you won't live long enough to see them arrive. The conviction in his voice sent a chill down Penelope's spine. This was a side of Adam she had never seen, hard as granite, his usually warm eyes cold with deadly purpose. Jed seemed to recognize the threat for what it was. His gaze flickered between Adam and the sheriff, calculating his odds. Maybe we can deal, he suggested. You let us ride out of here with the woman, and once we're clear, we'll let her go. No harm done. No deal, Adam said flatly. Release her. Now. Will's arm tightened around Penelope, and she felt something cold press against her ribs, the barrel of a pistol. Don't come any closer, he warned, or she gets it. Time seemed to slow. Penelope saw Adam's finger tense on the trigger of his rifle, saw the sheriff shifting his aim toward Will. In that moment, she knew that if she didn't act, someone was going to die, and it might well be Adam. Summoning all her strength, Penelope drove her elbow backward into Will's stomach with as much force as she could muster. The young outlaw grunted in pain, his grip loosening just enough for Penelope to twist sideways and throw herself from the horse. She hit the ground hard, the breath knocked from her lungs, but she immediately rolled away, putting distance between herself and the Blackwells. Adam fired, his bullet catching Will in the shoulder and sending him toppling from his mount with a cry of pain. Chaos erupted. Tom drew his revolver but was cut down by the sheriff's shot before he could fire. Jed, seeing his brothers fall, wheeled his horse around and spurred it toward the trees, only to be met by 3 riders emerging from the forest, the posse that had been real after all. Within moments, it was over. Will and Tom were wounded but alive, disarmed and under the guns of the posse members. Jed had been brought down from his horse and now lay face down in the mud, the sheriff's knee firmly planted in his back as he was handcuffed. And then Adam was there, gathering Penelope into his arms, his hands moving over her frantically as he checked for injuries. Are you hurt? Did they harm you? Penelope shook her head, too overwhelmed to speak. Now that the danger had passed, reaction was setting in, and she trembled uncontrollably in his embrace. It's over, Adam murmured, pressing his lips to her forehead, her temple, her cheek. You're safe now, I've got you. Sheriff Matthews approached, his weathered face grave as he took in Penelope's bruised cheek and bound wrists. Miss Turner, I'm mighty sorry about this. We've been tracking these boys for weeks, but we never expected them to hit so close to town. Adam gently untied her wrists, his jaw tightening at the sight of the raw skin beneath the ropes. How did you know to come here? He asked the sheriff as he wrapped his bandana around Penelope's abraded wrists. One of my deputies spotted them heading this way and recognized them from the wanted posters, Matthews explained. I sent word to your place, and when we met up on the road, you mentioned checking on Miss Turner. Adam nodded grimly. Good thing we did. Yes, Penelope agreed, finding her voice at last. Thank you both. She looked up at Adam, her heart in her eyes. How did you know I was in trouble? A small smile touched his lips. I didn't, not for certain, but I had a feeling. Something just didn't sit right with me this morning. Call it instinct. Or love, she whispered for his ears alone, his arms tightened around her. Or that, he agreed softly. The Blackwell brothers were loaded into a wagon for transport to the jail in Montana City, where they would await the circuit judge's return and stand trial for their numerous crimes. Penelope gave her statement to the sheriff, recounting how the men had arrived under the pretense of seeking water for their horses. You were smart to run, Matthews told her, and even smarter to give us that warning shout. We might not have found you in time otherwise. By evening, the excitement had died down, and Penelope found herself back in her cabin, seated before the fire with a blanket around her shoulders and a cup of hot tea in her hands. Adam had refused to leave her side, insisting on staying the night to ensure she felt safe. "You don't have to do that," she protested weakly. "The Blackwells are in custody. There's no danger now." Adam knelt before her chair, taking her hands in his. "I'm not staying because I think you're in danger," he said. "I'm staying because I can't bear the thought of being away from you tonight. Not after nearly losing you." The sincerity in his eyes melted any further objections she might have raised. "All right," she said simply. He smiled and rose, pressing a kiss to her forehead before moving to stoke the fire. As he worked, Penelope watched him, struck by how natural his presence in her home felt, as if he belonged there, as if this small cabin had always been waiting for him to fill the empty spaces. "Adam," she said suddenly, "ask me again." He turned, a questioning look on his face. "Ask you what?" "What you asked me last night. Ask me again." Understanding dawned in his eyes, and he crossed the room to kneel before her once more. "I love you, Penelope Turner," he said, his voice steady and sure. "With all that I am, I think I've been waiting for you my whole life, even when I didn't know it." Tears welled in Penelope's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow or fear. "And I love you, Adam Evans. You've shown me that it's possible to find happiness again, even after losing everything." Adam took her face in his hands, his touch infinitely gentle. "Not everything," he corrected. "You never lost your courage, or your determination, or your capacity for love. Those things brought you here to this place, to me." When he kissed her, Penelope felt as though something locked inside her had finally broken free. The ghosts of her past would always be there, but they no longer held power over her. With Adam, she had found not only love but the strength to face her nightmares and overcome them. That night, for the first time, Adam slept beside her properly. Both of them nestled beneath the quilts as the wind sang through the pines outside. And when the nightmare came, as it inevitably did, he was there to hold her through the darkest hours, his arms a sanctuary, his voice a lifeline drawing her back to safety. "I've got you," he whispered as she trembled against him. "I've got you, and I'm not letting go." Gradually, her breathing steadied, and the terror receded. In its place came a profound sense of peace as Penelope realized that while the nightmares might never disappear completely, she would never again have to face them alone. In the weeks that followed, a new routine developed. Adam spent more and more time at Penelope's homestead, returning to his ranch only when necessary to tend to his cattle and oversee his hired hands. The townspeople of Montana City nodded knowingly when they saw the couple together. But there was no malicious gossip, only approval of a match that seemed, to everyone who knew them, absolutely right. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and crimson, Adam cleared his throat nervously. "I've been thinking," he began, his fingers fidgeting with something in his pocket, "about the future, our future." Penelope set aside her mending, giving him her full attention. "Oh, and what thoughts have you had?" Instead of answering directly, Adam stood and moved to the porch railing, his back to her as he gazed out at the darkening landscape. "My father used to say that a man shouldn't ask a woman to share his life unless he can offer her something worth having." Penelope rose and went to stand beside him, slipping her hand into his. "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was," Adam agreed. "And I've been trying to live by his example." He turned to face her, his expression uncommonly serious. "I know what we have is still new, Penelope, and after everything you've been through, I would understand if you wanted more time." "Adam," she interrupted gently, "whatever you're trying to ask, just ask it." He took a deep breath, then dropped to one knee, still holding her hand. From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet pouch. "Penelope Turner, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Though she had suspected this was where the conversation was heading, the actual question still brought tears to her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Adam, I will marry you." A smile of pure joy transformed his face. He opened the pouch and tipped its contents into his palm, a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond that caught the last rays of sunlight. "It was my mother's," he explained as he slipped it onto her finger. "My father gave it to her when they decided to come west together to build a new life." Penelope admired the ring, then cupped Adam's face in her hands. "It's beautiful. And so fitting we're building a new life too, aren't we?" "We are," he agreed, rising to his feet and drawing her into his arms. "And it's going to be a wonderful one, Penelope. I promise you that." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Montana City. The entire community turned out for the occasion. The men in their Sunday best, the women in their finest dresses, all eager to witness the union of two people who had come to mean so much to them. Penelope wore a gown of ivory satin that Mrs. Hollister had helped her sew, with lace at the collar and cuffs that had been shipped all the way from St. Louis. She carried a bouquet of wildflowers gathered that morning, and her hair was adorned with a crown of the same blooms. But it was her smile that everyone remarked upon later, the radiant, unreserved joy that transformed her already lovely face into something truly breathtaking. And Adam, standing at the altar in a new black suit, looked at her with such naked adoration that even the most cynical observers were moved. The ceremony was simple but profound. They exchanged vows written in their own words, promises not only of love and fidelity but of partnership, of shared dreams, of a commitment to help each other through whatever storms life might bring. "I take you as you are," Adam said, his voice steady despite the emotion shining in his eyes. "With your strengths and your struggles, your joys and your sorrows. I promise to stand beside you through good times and bad, to hold you in the darkest hours, and to celebrate with you in the brightest moments." Penelope's voice trembled slightly as she responded, "I take you as my husband, my partner, my dearest friend. I promise to face life's challenges with courage, because you have shown me that I am stronger than I believed. I promise to build a home with you not just of wood and stone, but of love and trust and shared dreams." When the minister pronounced them man and wife, Adam gathered Penelope into his arms and kissed her with a tenderness that spoke volumes about the depth of his feelings. The congregation erupted in cheers and applause, and as they turned to face their friends and neighbors, Penelope felt a sense of belonging she had feared lost forever after the fire. The celebration that followed lasted well into the night, with music and dancing, feasting and laughter. Adam and Penelope moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes, sharing their happiness with the community that had embraced them both. As the evening wore on, they slipped away to the small house Adam had been preparing for their first night as husband and wife, a surprise he had kept from Penelope until that day. It wasn't the grand home he planned to build eventually on his ranch, but a charming cabin nestled in a grove of pines halfway between his property and hers, a symbolic meeting point for their joined lives. "It's perfect," Penelope breathed as they crossed the threshold, taking in the simple but comfortable furnishings, the cheerful fire in the hearth, the fresh flowers on the table. "When did you find time to do all this?" Adam smiled, pleased by her reaction. "I had help." Half the town was in on the secret. That night, as they lay together in the quiet intimacy of their marriage bed, Penelope marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the ashes of tragedy to the promise of new beginnings, from paralyzing nightmares to the safety of Adam's embrace, it seemed almost miraculous. "What are you thinking?" Adam asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "I'm thinking about how close I came to never knowing this happiness," she admitted. "If I hadn't found the courage to come west, if you hadn't been the kind of man who would help a stubborn stranger unload her wagon. If you hadn't screamed that night and woken me up," he added with a small smile. "Life is full of such moments, isn't it? Small decisions that change everything." Penelope nodded, nestling closer to him. "I used to think the fire was the end of my story. Now I see it was just the beginning of a different one." In the years that followed, their story continued to unfold in ways neither could have predicted. They built a proper home on Adam's ranch, a spacious house with wide porches and large windows that filled the rooms with light. Penelope's homestead wasn't abandoned but incorporated into their expanding operation, the original cabin eventually serving as a home for their foreman and his family. The nightmares never disappeared completely, but they became less frequent, less intense. And on the occasions when Penelope woke screaming, Adam was always there, his arms around her, his voice steady and reassuring as he guided her back to the present. Their family grew first with the arrival of their son, Michael, a sturdy boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit. 2 years later came the twins, Emma and Eliza, identical in appearance but distinctly different in temperament. And finally, when they had almost given up hope of more children, their youngest son, James, completed their family. Life on the ranch was never easy. There were droughts and harsh winters, cattle diseases and fluctuating market prices. But there were also moments of profound joy watching their children grow, expanding their herd, seeing Montana City flourish as the territory moved toward statehood. Through it all, Penelope and Adam faced each challenge together, their love deepening with each passing year, each shared triumph, each obstacle overcome. And if sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, Penelope still woke trembling from dreams of fire and loss, Adam was always there, holding her close, reminding her with his presence that she was no longer alone. "I've got you," he would whisper, just as he had that first night. "I've got you, and I'm not letting go." And as the first light of day filtered through their window, painting the room in soft gold, Penelope would look at the man who had saved her not just from the Blackwell brothers but from the prison of her own fears, and she would know with absolute certainty that she was home. On their 30th wedding anniversary, with their children grown and children of their own beginning to fill the big house with a new generation's laughter, Adam took Penelope back to the spot where they had first met, the small homestead that had been her beginning in the West. The original cabin still stood, weathered but solid, a testament to the durability of well-built things. They sat together on the porch, hand in hand, watching the sunset just as they had done countless times over the decades of their marriage. "Any regrets?" Adam asked, his voice older now but still carrying the warmth that had first drawn her to him. Penelope considered the question seriously. "Not one," she said finally. "Every hardship led us here to this life, to each other. How could I regret any of it?" Adam squeezed her hand, his weathered fingers entwined with hers. "Do you remember what I promised you on our wedding day?" "Every word," she assured him, "and you've kept each promise through good times and bad. As have you." He turned to look at her, his eyes crinkling at the corners in the smile that still made her heart skip a beat after all these years. "I loved you then, Penelope, but I love you even more now, knowing all that we've weathered together." As night fell over the Montana landscape, bringing with it the first stars of evening, Penelope leaned her head on the shoulder of the man who had held her through the darkest hours and celebrated with her in the brightest moments, just as he had vowed to do. "The best decision I ever made," she murmured, "was screaming loud enough to wake you that night." Adam chuckled, the sound rich with shared memories and enduring love. "And the best decision I ever made was answering that scream." Together, they watched the stars emerge, two souls who had found in each other not just love but healing, not just companionship but completion. And if the ghosts of the past occasionally whispered in the night wind, they had long since lost their power to frighten, transformed instead into reminders of all they had overcome, all they had built, all they had become together. For in the end, that was the true miracle of their journey, not that they had escaped their nightmares, but that they had faced them, hand in hand, and in doing so, had found their way to a joy deeper and more enduring than either had dared to dream possible.